everyone, it's Clarice, and today I'm going to be talking about the Philippine literature that I recently read. As some of you may know, I am Filipino. I have always lived in the Philippines, but unfortunately I haven't read nearly as much Philippine literature as I'd like to. So recently I've been trying to fix that, and there are actually quite a few that I've read over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to talk about all of those today. The first two of which being Midnight Tribunal and High Tide at Midnight, the fifth and sixth books in the Trece comic book series by Budgetan and Cajo Baldissimo. As some of you may know, this is a series set in a world where the creatures of Philippine mythology not only exist, but are actually forming this whole underground community. They're selling drugs, they're forming gangs, they're killing innocents. These are creatures that regular crime fighters don't even know about, much less actually know how to deal with. So when crime takes a turn for the weird, Alexandra Trece is there to solve the case. The first few volumes of this comic book series are actually very episodic in nature. Every single issue had a different story, basically almost completely detached from the rest of the stories. And while I still enjoyed it, recently it's taken a different direction, and now every single one of these issues is actually connected to the next one. We're able to learn more about the characters that we already know, but we're also being introduced to new characters, seeing relationships kind of forming between the characters, and I love that now we're being able to do that, just because I enjoy some of the characters in this series so much. Even though this is a fantasy series, I love how the topics being dealt with are actually really relevant to current society. These stories highlight things like the corruption in society, about poverty, about even the weather and typhoons that our country has to face often. Overall, I love where this series is headed. I love that there's an Imelda Marcos-like character here now, and I'm interested to learn more about her and about what she's going to do. I love that Trece is starting to have a personal life. I love that we're seeing bigger story arcs and that there's a whole larger overall story arc. And generally, I'm just really excited to get to Volume 7 because unfortunately, Volume 6 is the last one that's out, which is a shame because it came out in December 2014. Though a side note, I really dislike these newer covers as compared to the older ones. I think all of them together are supposed to form a picture, but I don't like it. I mean, compare these new covers with the awkward gigantic faces to these old covers, which are all just black and white, and I don't know, I prefer these just so much more. The next thing I read was Poon by F. Chanel Jose, which is the first book in the Rosales saga. And I just recently learned that even though this is the first book chronologically in the Rosales saga, this was actually the last book published. Because the books in the series aren't actually directly connected, they follow several generations from this family throughout Spanish and American colonization in the Philippines, but you can actually read any of these books at any order. You don't need to read all of them. But since I'm planning to read all of them anyway, I figured I'd just read them all in chronological order. But Poon specifically follows the life of Istak. He is an intelligent Filipino born to a family of farmers, but is taken under the tutelage of a Spanish priest, which goes well for a while, but obviously it couldn't stay that way, could it? It's a story about discrimination, family, and about sacrifice, set at the time of Spanish and eventually American colonization in the Philippines. Even though this book is only 230-something pages long, I actually took a bit of time reading this because I don't feel like this is a book that I would enjoy if I tried to rush through it. Admittedly, at times it did feel a bit like a history lesson, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It was a new story, but one that reinforced all the things that I've been hearing constantly during my social studies class. There were a lot of familiar concepts because of this. The idea of the Spaniards using religion as a weapon against the Filipinos, the corruption in the church and among those in power, the way that the Spaniards referred to us as Indios, and how they treated us as a people that are below them. For example, some of the quotes that were said by a Spanish priest in this book. He showed great intelligence for which his race is not particularly noted. You were born to be like the Carabao to serve us. Maybe there were times that this history lesson-like feeling made this book less enjoyable for me, and so there were times that the book dragged, but again, maybe just because this isn't a book that you're supposed to rush through. But at the same time, the familiarity allowed me to sort of relate to these hardships a little bit more personally, even though obviously they aren't things that I went through myself. And the only real complaint I have about this book, which maybe would be remedied in later books because maybe it won't feel as out of place then, is because this book felt mainly like a historical fiction book at first. When some weird elements of magical realism or that sort of thing came in, it felt so out of place and didn't really seem relevant to me, so it took me a bit out of the story. Otherwise, I'm really glad that I read this book. It's a really good reminder, I think, of what exactly the people in my country had to go through. The next book I read was Elmer, which is a comic that I loved so much that I already uploaded a full review of it, which I'll link on the screen. Just to talk about it really quickly, this comic asks what would happen if suddenly chickens became an intelligent race, just like the humans. While the concept is really funny, it's a really thought-provoking book, and it doesn't explore this idea just as an overview, but instead through the story of the family of the main character. It's absolutely a new favorite, and it kind of hurts me that I don't have a physical copy of it yet since I borrowed this from the library, but I will get one soon, and I really hope that you pick it up because I enjoyed it so much. And the last book I'm going to talk about is Smaller and Smaller Circles by F.H. Batacan. And this book is about a couple of priests that try to solve a string of murders. But even though this was classified as a mystery novel, it wasn't just about the mystery, but also about just generally the issues that are found in Philippine society. And it's actually mentioned in the back in the acknowledgements that these problems were what inspired her to write this book. I was angry. Angry about my job, about the state of my country, about the callousness, complacency, and corruption that had dragged it there. And you definitely see that in this book. It touches on so many issues. Issues like poverty, issues like corruption in the government, in the church, in the police force, basically everywhere. About the time of martial law when President Marcos was our dictator, and how it's a time that we're still continuing to recover from. Even issues like the terrible traffic that we experience every day, and about the weather and the terrible typhoons that our country always seems to attract. I also enjoyed the less significant references that were made, references to universities that I know, to food that I eat, and to places that I go to. What I enjoyed about this book though was even though it touched on so many important issues, it wasn't a book that was just like, oh, look at all the problems we have, and then try to form a story out of it. I didn't feel like it was just trying hard to show all of these things through a story, but instead what occurred in this story was just a natural consequence of all of these issues. So in conclusion, while I still have so much more Philippine literature to read, I think this is a good place to start, especially if you're trying to read books from other countries, to try to get a better worldview and to learn from the experiences of people that are going through things that are different from yourself. It isn't overwhelming because it doesn't just bombard you with history or fact, but at the same time, it doesn't hold back and it doesn't try to cover up all these serious issues that we're facing in the country. Even as someone who lives here, it reminded me of just how sheltered and lucky I am to not have to go through these things, and also how, in spite of that, there's so much I can do for this country and for the people who unfortunately aren't as lucky as I am, which to me is why I think this is a really good book and one that you should read. It isn't quite a new favorite, but I'm so glad that I read it, and I hope that more people read it. So those are the books by Filipinos that I read recently, and I hope to read so much more. So have you read any of these books, or are you interested in reading any of them? Please feel free to tell me your thoughts in the comment section down below. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!